I learned too late that the loudest grief in the room is almost always the most fraudulent. The people who actually sit with the dying do not have the energy to perform. They do not have a free hand for the phone. They do not curate the photographs. They are too busy turning a body without bruising it, too busy crushing a pill into applesauce, too busy counting respirations in the dark. My sister told a probate judge I abandoned our dying mother to play soldier. The hospice chaplain she called as a witness had prayed beside me while I held our mother's hand. The petition was filed on a Tuesday. The hearing was set for 14 days later, the second Tuesday in October, 10 in the morning, Judge Hollister presiding, Sullivan County Probate Court, Courtroom 2B. I wrote those details on the back of a receipt the morning I got served, because my hands needed something to do. My name is Dana Mercer. I am 46 years old. I spent 8 years as a combat medic in the Army before an IED outside Mosul, put a piece of metal through my left shoulder, and ended that life on a Tuesday afternoon in a cash tent that smelled like copper and iodine and blood. I'm a nurse practitioner now. I run a primary care panel of about 900 patients in a clinic 40 minutes from the house I grew up in. I can no longer raise my left arm above my ear without a slow, careful lift, and the shrapnel scar across the joint aches when the air drops below 50 degrees. October had just gone cold. The hearing was in 9 days when I sat in the courthouse parking lot for the first deposition. Brittle leaves were scraping across the asphalt, dragging that dry sandpaper sound under the cars. I put both hands on the steering wheel and felt the cold pull through the joint. I had not cried at the funeral. I had not cried when Vivian slipped the envelope into my palm at the reception while the church photographer counted to 3. I was not going to cry in a parking lot. I sat there for 11 minutes. I looked at my phone. I opened the family group chat one more time, even though I already knew. The message at the top still said the same thing. You have been removed from this conversation by the admin. Vivian had created it 3 months earlier, named it Mom's Care Team, added every aunt and cousin and second cousin from our father's side, and then locked me out the week after the funeral. I had watched my Aunt Carol's profile picture change to a black ribbon and could not send her a single word. I could not tell my own family I had been there. The narrative had a fence around it, and Vivian was the gate. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and went inside. If you have ever watched someone rewrite your life in real time and not been allowed in the room while they did it, stay with me. I'm telling this the way it happened, in order, the way I would chart a code in a trauma bay. You are going to want to hear how a probate judge in a small county courtroom learned what my sister actually did. Vivian is 2 years younger than I am. She has always understood something I have never understood, which is that most people decide what is real based on what they can scroll through. She did not visit the hospice. She visited the idea of the hospice. She made a private Facebook group 3 weeks after the diagnosis and called it Grace's Prayer Warriors. She added 147 people, including our mother's neighbor, Mrs. Gable, Elder Miller from the church, 2 pastors, a women's Bible study, a quilting circle, and most of the congregation. She posted every day. Photos of casseroles she dropped off on the porch and did not stay to share. Photos of herself sitting on the edge of Mom's bed during the 4 total visits she made over 6 months, captioned with scripture. Photos of the hospice hallway, soft-filtered, captioned, "Another long night." She was never there for a long night. She was there for the photograph. And then she was in her car by 7. I was on the floor of that hospice room for 11 straight days. I took emergency leave from the clinic. I slept in the green vinyl recliner with my boots still on. I learned the rhythm of the oxygen concentrator the way you learn a heartbeat. The room had its own permanent smell. Lavender lotion the nurses applied to her arms twice a day, sweet and industrial at once. laid over the deeper smell underneath it that no lotion could fully cover, the smell of a body working very hard to stop. I crushed her morphine tablets with the back of a metal spoon because the pill cutter was bending them wrong. I would hear the mechanical click of each safety cap in the dark before I could see it clearly, my hands working by feel and training, while the heavy, dragging fatigue behind my eyes settled into something permanent. I turned her every 2 hours with the draw sheet, using my right arm to do the work of two, bracing my left elbow against my ribcage so the joint would not give out, and the sharp snap of a fresh pair of nitrile gloves before each repositioning was the closest thing that room had to a shift change. I did it without bruising her, because that is what 8 years of trauma medicine teaches your hands to do. The hospice nurses asked me on day 3 if I would mind taking lead on the comfort care. By day 5, they were charting my adjustments. By day 7, the on-call doctor was reading my notes before she read theirs. Vivian came on day 9. She brought a casserole, took a photograph of our mother's hand resting on the quilt, posted it to the prayer warriors group with the caption, "Holding Vigil," and left after 40 minutes because she had a hair appointment. I know it was a hair appointment because the next post, 3 hours later, was a mirror selfie of her new highlights in front of the salon window. I did not say anything. I went back to counting respirations. Mom died on the 12th night at 3:47 in the morning, with her right hand in my right hand and my left hand on her sternum, feeling the last shallow rise. The chaplain was in the chair by the window. His name was Marcus Thorne. He had been in that room for parts of 9 of the 11 days. He prayed quietly. He did not perform. He brought me coffee twice. He never once took out a phone. The funeral was 4 days later. The reception was in the church fellowship hall. There were 200 people there, most of whom I did not know, most of whom had been reading Vivian's posts for 6 months and believed they had been part of something. The church photographer was a high school junior with a borrowed camera. Vivian had hired her for the day. Vivian walked up to me at the punch table, put her arm around my waist for the first time in 9 years, smiled at the camera, and pressed a folded manila envelope into my left hand under cover of the hug. The girl took 3 photos. Vivian let go, said, "Love you, sis," loud enough for the people behind me to hear, and walked away toward Elder Miller. The envelope was a notice of will contest. Vivian was claiming undue influence, alleging I had isolated our mother in her final days and pressured her to leave me an equal share. The petition included a typed letter, signed Mom, dated 3 weeks before the death, stating that Grace was hurt by my absence, ashamed of my choice to play soldier instead of being a daughter, and wished to leave her entire estate to Vivian. The signature at the bottom was a careful, looping script. I recognized the shape of it. I also recognized that my mother had not written a cursive capital G with that closed bottom loop since her hand started shaking from the chemo, which was about 4 months before the date on that letter. I drove home that night and sat in the kitchen with the envelope on the table and did not open my laptop, and did not call my lawyer, and did not eat anything. I sat there until 2 in the morning, and I will tell you the truth, because I owe the truth a place in this story. Vivian's resentment did not come from nothing. I had been gone for most of my 20s. I had missed 2 of her birthdays during back-to-back deployments. I had been bad at calling. I had been worse at coming home on leave. There were Christmases I spent in a tent in Kandahar instead of in my mother's kitchen, and there were years when the only thing I sent was a card I bought at the PX. She wasn't entirely wrong about the disappearing. She was wrong about the last 11 days. Those 11 days were mine. She could rewrite 10 years of my life if she wanted to, but she could not rewrite the part where I was the one in the chair when the breathing stopped. I retained an attorney the next morning. His name was Blake. He was 61 years old, and he had handled probate in that county for 34 years. He read the petition once, set it down, and said, "Forged letters are not unusual. Forged letters that the petitioner reads aloud in open court are unusual. Let her read it." Over the next 9 days, Vivian's narrative did what narratives like that do when nobody pushes back. It hardened. Mrs. Gable, our mother's neighbor of 22 years, told the deposition that she had never once seen my car in the driveway during the final months. This was technically true, because the hospice was 40 miles from the house, and I had not been at the house. I had been at the hospice. Mrs. Gable had not asked. She had read the Facebook posts, and the Facebook post said, "Holding vigil alone," and so she believed she had been told the truth. Elder Miller, who had baptized me when I was 9, told the deposition that he had ministered to my mother in her loneliness, that Grace had confided in him about her disappointment in her older daughter, and that he had personally seen Vivian carrying the weight of this family alone. He had visited the hospice exactly once for 20 minutes on a day I had stepped out to the parking lot to take a call from the clinic. Vivian had been in the room when he arrived. Vivian had told him I had not been there in weeks. He had no reason to disbelieve her. He went home and told his wife, and his wife told her sister. And by the time the deposition came around, it was a fact in 3 counties. Vivian brought my mother's cell phone records to prove I didn't call. She didn't bring my medical charts from Mosul to explain why. She had pulled records from 2019 and 2020 during my last deployment and presented them as though they were from the months of the illness. Blake caught it on cross. The dates did not match. Vivian's attorney, a man named Davis with an expensive tie and a tired face, asked for a recess and came back with a revised exhibit. The damage was already in the deposition transcript. The fact of the gaps was now part of the record, even if the years had been corrected. I did not say anything during the deposition except in answer to direct questions. When Davis asked me why I had not visited my mother more frequently during the illness, I said, "I was on a deployment schedule." He asked me to clarify. I said, "I took emergency leave for the final 11 days." He asked me if I had any documentation of those 11 days. I said, "The hospice has a sign-in sheet." He moved on because Vivian had told him there was no sign-in sheet, because Vivian had not seen one, because Vivian had not been there to see one. The morning of the hearing was 38 degrees and clear. I parked in the same spot in the courthouse lot. I sat in the car for 9 minutes this time. I reached up with my right hand and pulled the visor down to check my face in the mirror, because my left arm would not make that reach without a wince, and I did not want to walk into a courtroom wincing. I put my mother's blue fabric-bound journal into my bag. The spine was cracked. The pages were soft. I had found it in her nightstand the day after the funeral, wrapped in a pillowcase, and I had not opened it. I did not know yet what was in it. Oh, I knew only that her handwriting was inside, and that her handwriting was the thing Vivian had not been able to copy. Courtroom 2B smelled like lemon polish on old oak. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that lived just under hearing. The wooden bench pressed a hard ridge into my spine, and I shifted my weight so the left shoulder would not catch. Vivian sat at the petitioner's table in a black dress and a gold cross. She had her phone in her lap under the table. She was scrolling. Davis sat beside her with a leather folio. Behind them, in the second row, sat Mrs. Gable in a navy coat, and Elder Miller in a gray suit with a rotary pin, and 1 row back from them, by himself, sat a man in a dark clerical shirt with a small silver cross on the collar. Chaplain Marcus Thorne. He had been subpoenaed by Davis. He met my eyes for 1 second, and then looked down at his hands. Judge Hollister came in at 10 on the minute. The clerk called the case. Davis stood and told the court that the petitioner would be presenting evidence of undue influence and abandonment, including a letter from the decedent, dated approximately 3 weeks before her death, expressing her wishes. He held up the manila envelope. Vivian was sworn in. She walked to the witness box with her shoulders pulled back and her chin slightly up, and she sat down with the practiced sadness of a woman who has rehearsed sadness into a useful thing. Davis walked her through the easy questions first. Her name, her relationship to the decedent, the dates of their mother's diagnosis, treatment, decline. Vivian answered each one with a small hitch in her voice, the kind of hitch you can practice in a mirror. Then Davis moved to the phone records. He held up a stack of paper. He walked Vivian through it page by page. There were highlighted rows on every sheet. He asked her to identify the gaps. Vivian leaned toward the microphone. "These are the months my mother tried to call her," Vivian said. 3, 4 months at a time. No return calls, no texts. She would sit by the phone. "And these dates," Davis said, "what do they correspond to?" "That's when Dana was overseas," Vivian said. "She chose the Army over her dying mother. She was playing soldier while I was doing the real work of keeping this family together." I reached up with my right hand and pressed my thumb into the scarred joint of my left shoulder. The IED in Mosul had happened in 2011. My mother had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in May of this year. The phone records Vivian was holding were a decade old. Davis did not say that. Vivian did not say that. The judge was looking at the highlighted pages. Davis moved on to the letter. He produced it from the manila envelope with the slow ceremony of a magician revealing a card. He read it aloud. It was 3 paragraphs long. It said that Grace had been disappointed in her older daughter for years, that she felt abandoned, that she wished to leave the bulk of her estate to the daughter who had been present. The signature at the bottom was a careful, deliberate cursive in blue ink. Davis asked Vivian if she recognized the handwriting. "That's my mother's hand," Vivian said. Her voice cracked on the word mother. Elder Miller, in the second row, closed his eyes and nodded once, the slow nod of a man confirming something he had already been told was true. Mrs. Gable pressed a tissue to her mouth. Vivian's phone records were real, but they were from a war that ended my career 9 years before my mother got sick. The letter was a forgery. The room did not know either of those things yet. The room only knew what Vivian had told it for months on a private Facebook group called Grace's Prayer Warriors, with 217 members and daily updates and filtered photographs of a hospice room I was standing in but had been cropped out of. If you've ever watched someone dig their own grave with their mouth, you know what comes next. Davis tendered the letter into evidence as Petitioner's Exhibit 4. The judge accepted it provisionally, pending authentication. Davis said he would call a handwriting expert in the next phase. He thanked the witness. He sat down. Blake stood up for cross. He was a quiet man in a brown suit who did not raise his voice for any reason. He asked Vivian 3 questions. He asked her the date of the phone records she had submitted. She said she would have to check. He asked her when she had last physically visited their mother at the hospice center on Linwood Avenue. She said she had been there constantly. He asked her to be more specific. She said she did not keep a log. He sat down. Davis called his next witness. "The petitioner calls Chaplain Marcus Thorne." Thorne stood. He walked to the witness box without looking at Vivian and without looking at me. He was a man in his late 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of stillness in his body that comes from sitting beside dying people for a living. He placed his hand on the Bible. He swore to tell the truth. He sat down. Davis began with the easy questions again: name, position, length of service at the hospice center, the protocols of pastoral care. Thorne answered in short, level sentences. Davis was building toward something. He thought he was building toward isolation. He thought Thorne was going to tell the court that Grace Mercer had been a lonely woman in her final days, abandoned by her older daughter, comforted only by her younger one and the staff. That was the story Vivian had told him. Davis believed it because his client had wept telling it. "Chaplain Thorne," Davis said, In your professional observation, was Grace Mercer alone during her final weeks? Thorne paused. He looked at Davis. He looked at the manila envelope on the petitioner's table. He looked at Vivian, who was watching him with the expectant half-smile of a person waiting to receive a gift. I would need you to define alone, Thorne said. Without family present, Davis said. No, Thorne said. She was not. Davis tilted his head. He had not expected the word no. He recovered. Chaplain, isn't it true that Mrs. Mercer's visitor log, maintained by her daughter Vivian Hayes, shows that the petitioner was the primary visitor in the final month? I don't know what's on that log, Thorne said. I know what was in the room. Davis tried again. He had a script. He was going to stick to it. The visitor log indicates that Dana Mercer was not present in the final weeks. The Facebook updates that Mrs. Hayes maintained for the family and church communities show the same. Are you suggesting Mrs. Hayes is mistaken about who visited her own mother? The courtroom HVAC hummed. The court reporter's machine clicked. Somewhere in the gallery, a wooden bench creaked under shifting weight. I felt the dull throb behind my left collarbone, the way the scar tightened when the room got cold. I did not move. I kept my right hand resting on my left forearm. I did not look at Vivian. I looked at Thorne. Thorne leaned forward into the microphone. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. You're asking if her mother was alone, he said, because there weren't pictures on the internet. Davis opened his mouth. He closed it. Thorne kept his eyes on Davis. You didn't ask who was adjusting her morphine dosage, he said. You just assumed the nurses did it. Thorne turned in the witness box. He turned his whole upper body. He looked past Davis, past Vivian, past Mrs. Gable and Elder Miller in the second row, and he looked directly at me. Then he turned back to the judge. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to correct the record. Please, Judge Hollister said. I was the on-call chaplain at Linwood Hospice for the 11 days preceding Grace Mercer's death. I prayed in that room every evening between 6 and 7. I watched this woman. And he raised his hand and pointed at me without looking at me, his arm extended toward the defense table. Administer palliative care with a combat medic's precision for 11 days straight. Grace died holding her hand. The only reason Vivian doesn't know that is because Vivian never came to the hospice center. The room did not move. Davis said, Your Honor, I'd like to... I'm not finished, Thorne said. Judge Hollister lifted one finger to Davis. Thorne went on. There were patches pinned to the corkboard above her bed. 2 of them. Subdued tan, combat medical badge, and the unit insignia from her last deployment. Grace asked me on the 3rd day to make sure no one took them down. She said her older daughter had earned them and she wanted them where she could see them. On the 9th day, during a lucid stretch in the early evening, Grace asked me to remember something for her in case she didn't get a chance to say it. She said, and I am quoting her, My combat medic daughter is the bravest person I've ever known. I wrote it down in my pastoral notes that night. I have those notes with me. He patted his breast pocket. Vivian made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when the floor they were standing on becomes air. That's not, she said. She wasn't even in the state she was. Mrs. Hayes, the judge said, you're not on the stand. You will be silent. Blake was already standing. He had my mother's journal in his hand. I had given it to him at the table just before the cross-examination began, and he had not opened it then, because I had not opened it, and we had agreed that whatever was inside would be inside whether or not we read it first. He approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Respondent's Exhibit A. This is a personal journal kept by the decedent, retrieved from her nightstand by my client after the funeral. It contains approximately 4 years of handwritten entries in the decedent's hand. I'd ask the court to compare the handwriting in this journal to the signature on Petitioner's Exhibit 4. The judge took the journal. He took the forged letter. He set them side by side on the bench. He put on a pair of reading glasses he kept in a leather case, and he looked down at the two documents for a long time. The courtroom did not have a sound in it. Vivian had stopped scrolling. Her phone was face down on the petitioner's table. Davis was looking at the carpet. I watched the judge's eyes move from one page to the other and back. I watched his mouth tighten. He turned a page in the journal. He turned another. He found an entry that interested him, and he held it next to the letter, and he looked at it for what felt like a full minute. He took off the reading glasses. "Mr. Davis," he said. "Your Honor," Davis said. "Would you like to approach the bench and take a look at these two documents side by side?" Davis approached. He did not want to. He stood at the bench, and the judge slid both documents toward him, and Davis looked down at them, and his shoulders dropped 1/4 of an inch. He stood there for several seconds. He did not pick anything up. He turned and walked back to his table. Vivian was watching him. She had figured out something was wrong, but she had not figured out what. Davis sat down beside her. He did not look at her. He whispered something. Vivian shook her head. She whispered back. Davis closed his eyes. The judge said, "Chaplain, you may step down. Thank you for your testimony." Thorne stepped down. He walked past the petitioner's table without looking at Vivian. He walked past the second row without looking at Mrs. Gable or Elder Miller. He sat down in the back of the gallery and folded his hands in his lap. Blake was still standing. He had not sat back down because he was not finished. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I have one question for my client before the petitioner continues." "Briefly," the judge said. Blake turned to me. The courtroom turned with him. Vivian, Davis, Mrs. Gable, Elder Miller, the bailiff, the court reporter, the judge. They were all looking at me. I had not spoken a word in the courtroom since the bailiff had asked me to confirm my name 40 minutes earlier. I reached up with my right hand and pressed my thumb once into the scarred joint of my left shoulder. Then I let my hand fall. Blake said, "Ms. Mercer, can you tell the court, in one sentence, why you didn't post on Facebook from your mother's hospice room?" I leaned toward the microphone in front of me at the defense table. "I didn't need to be in your Facebook photos to be in her room," I said. I had been looking at Blake when I started the sentence. I was looking at Vivian when I finished it. Vivian's face did something I had never seen it do before. The careful arrangement of grief, the gold cross at her throat, the practiced tilt of her chin, all of it slid sideways at once, like a mask that had come unpinned. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. The judge picked up the forged letter between his thumb and forefinger as though it were something he did not want to touch for very long. He held it up beside the open journal. He turned his gaze slowly to Vivian. "Mr. Davis," he said, without taking his eyes off her, "would you like to reconsider your evidence?" Davis was on his feet before the judge finished the question. His hand was on the corner of the petitioner's table, and his knuckles were white where he was pressing down into the wood. "Your Honor, I'd ask for a brief recess to confer with my client." "No," the judge said. Just that. One word, flat, the way you might set down a heavy book. Davis stayed standing. He did not seem to know what to do with his hands. Vivian was looking up at him from her chair, and for the first time since I had known her as an adult, she was waiting for someone else to tell her what the story was. "Mr. Davis," the judge said again, "you submitted this letter into evidence as the authenticated final wishes of the decedent. You did so under your signature as an officer of this court. I am giving you one opportunity to address that submission before I rule." Davis looked down at Vivian. Vivian looked up at Davis. Whatever she said to him then, She said it low and quick, with her hand half cupped around her mouth like she was still trying to keep the room from seeing her. Davis closed his eyes for the second time in 5 minutes. He turned back to the bench. Your Honor, in light of the testimony just received, the petitioner withdraws the letter from evidence. The letter is not withdrawn, the judge said. The letter is in the record. What you may do is withdraw the petition. Blake did not move. He did not need to. He had stopped being the one doing the work. Davis tried once more. Your Honor, if I could have 10 minutes. You may have until I finish speaking, the judge said. The petition to contest the will of Grace Mercer is dismissed with prejudice. The court finds the supporting documents submitted under Exhibit 3 to be inconsistent with the verified handwriting in Exhibit 7. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review under the state forgery statute. The petitioner is ordered to pay the respondent's legal fees in full. Mr. Davis, I would advise your client not to leave the county without informing your office. He set the letter down. He set the journal down beside it, gently, the way Thorne had set it on the witness rail. We are adjourned. The gavel came down. It was not loud. It did not need to be. I did not stand up right away. The room emptied around me in a particular order, and I watched it happen because I wanted to remember it. Elder Miller stood first. He did not look at Vivian. He picked up his coat from the bench beside him, folded it once over his arm, and walked out through the center aisle without breaking stride. Mrs. Gable stood next. She started toward the petitioner's table, raised her hand halfway, then stopped, then turned and went out the side door instead. 2 women I did not recognize, women who had been sitting on Vivian's side of the gallery in dark blouses with small gold crosses, gathered their purses and left without speaking to each other. Vivian was still in her chair. Davis was packing his briefcase one item at a time, taking longer than he needed to, the way people do when they are trying to think of what to say to a client they no longer want to represent. I stood up. My left shoulder caught when I shifted my weight, and I let it catch. I did not rush it. Blake handed me the journal. He had wrapped a rubber band around it to keep the loose page from sliding out. Take this home, he said. I'll handle the fee motion. You don't need to be in this building again. What happens to her? He glanced toward the petitioner's table without turning his head. The DA will look at it. They may charge it. They may not. The forgery is clean on the face of the document, but prosecutors pick their cases. Either way, she's done in this courthouse, and the judge made sure the record reflects why. And the estate? The estate is yours, the way your mother wrote it. The probate clerk will release the hold by end of week. I nodded. I put the journal in my bag, against my hip, where the strap took the weight off my left side. The hallway outside the courtroom had the same lemon polish smell, only thinner now, mixed with the cold air leaking in from the main doors at the far end. The brittle leaves were still scraping across the parking lot outside. I could hear them through the glass. Mrs. Gable was waiting near the water fountain. She had her coat buttoned all the way up, and she was holding her purse with both hands in front of her like a shield. Dana, I stopped. I did not move toward her. I did not move away. I want you to know, she said. I want you to know that I only knew what I was told, what I saw. On the page she made. I'm not a person who goes looking for trouble. I trusted what she put up there because she was the one who was writing it and you weren't. And I thought, well, that meant something. She waited. She wanted me to fill in the rest. To tell her it was understandable, that anyone would have made the same mistake, that she was not part of what had happened in that room. I shifted the strap of my bag to ease the pull on my shoulder. Mrs. Gable, my mother lived 2 houses down from you for 31 years. I know that, honey. You had her key. You watered her tomato plants the summer she had her gallbladder out. You knew her phone number by heart. I did. You could have called her. Any day in the last 6 months you could have called her, and she would have told you who was sitting beside her bed. Her mouth opened. She started to say something about Vivian, and then she stopped, because there was nowhere for that sentence to go that did not end with her admitting she had taken a photograph on a screen over a phone call to a friend. "I'm sorry," she said. "I believe you are." I did not say it was all right. I did not say I forgave her. I did not say we would see each other at the church potluck. I let the apology sit in the air between us, acknowledged but not absorbed. And after a moment she nodded the small, tight nod of a person who has understood something she did not want to understand, and she walked toward the main doors. I stood there a minute longer. I did not look back into the courtroom. I did not need to see Vivian leaving. The order of the room had already told me everything about what her life was going to look like by Sunday. I learned the rest the way you learn most things in a small town, which is sideways, and from people who are not quite sure whether you want to know. The fee judgment came through on a Thursday, $18,400, payable within 60 days. Blake's paralegal called to tell me the check had cleared from Vivian's account on day 58. The district attorney's office sent a letter on county letterhead 3 weeks later. They had reviewed the forgery referral and declined to file criminal charges, citing prosecutorial discretion and the civil resolution already on the record. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. I read it once and put it in the drawer with the fee judgment. The rest came in pieces. An aunt I had not heard from in 2 years called to ask if it was true that the prayer group had been disbanded. I told her I did not know. She told me it had. Elder Miller had asked Vivian to step down from the women's ministry leadership at the end of the month, and when she had pushed back, the senior pastor had asked her to take a leave of absence for her own healing. The Facebook group, the one I had been blocked from for 8 months, had gone dark on a Tuesday. No final post, no explanation, just gone. A cousin texted me a screenshot of a comment thread on the church's public page. Someone had asked, in a polite roundabout way, whether the rumors about the Mercer estate were true. 3 different women had answered before anyone from the church could moderate the thread. By the time the post was taken down, the answers were already on 6 different phones. Mrs. Gable, I heard later, had brought a casserole to the parsonage and stayed for an hour. I do not know what she said. I know that the next Sunday, she sat on the opposite side of the sanctuary from where she had sat for 19 years. Vivian did not call. She did not write. The fee check was the only thing she ever sent me. 6 weeks after the hearing, a card arrived in my mailbox with no return address. The handwriting on the envelope was hers. I held it for a long time before I opened it. Inside, on a folded piece of plain stationery, she had written 4 sentences. I didn't know about the 11 days. I didn't ask. I should have. I'm sorry. No signature, no request, no explanation of what she wanted to happen next. I put the card in the drawer with the journal, not the drawer with the fee judgment. The other one. I did not write back. Not that week. Not the week after. 3 months later, when the first hard frost came, I sent her a card of my own. 1 sentence. Sometime. Not soon. That was all. I did not know yet whether I meant it. I knew that I did not want to close the door so hard that I could not hear if she ever knocked on it the right way. The porch was cold the night I finally finished the journal. I had been reading it in pieces since the hearing, a few pages at a time, the way you eat something rich. My mother had started it the year my father died, and she had written in it whenever the Spirit moved her, which turned out to be more often than I had known. There was an entry from the spring I deployed to Mosul. She had taped a photograph to the page. It was a picture of a care package, opened on her kitchen table, with the contents laid out the way I had packed them. Tea, a scarf, a small wooden bird I had bought at a market outside the wire. Below the photograph, in the handwriting the judge had held up against the forgery, she had written, My Dana sends me birds from the desert. She thinks I do not know what she is doing over there. I know. I do not say. A woman who carries other people's lives in her hands does not need her mother making a fuss. I make tea. I drink it. I am proud of her, in the quiet way she would want. I closed the journal. I set it on the porch railing. I sat there until the cold worked its way through my jacket and into the scarred joint of my left shoulder, and then I went inside. Tuesday morning, I drove to the clinic. The waiting room was already full when I came in through the staff door. Flu season had started early. The fluorescent buzz was the same as the courthouse. Only the smell was different here. Hand sanitizer and paper gowns and the faint plastic of unwrapped tongue depressors. I hung my coat in the locker. I put on my badge. I put on my stethoscope, lifting it carefully over my head with my right hand and easing it down past my left shoulder the way I had been doing for 14 years. The medical assistant handed me the first chart. A teenage girl with a cough that had not cleared in 3 weeks. A grandfather with blood pressure his daughter was worried about. A 6-year-old with an ear infection who had cried herself out in the car and was now eating goldfish crackers in her mother's lap. I went into room 1. I washed my hands. I introduced myself. I asked the girl with the cough to take a breath in, and then another, and then another, and I listened. I thought, for just a second, about the courtroom, about Thorne on the stand, about the judge holding the letter up beside the journal, about Vivian's face when the mask came unpinned. Then I let it go, because the girl in front of me was still breathing, and that was the part of the work that was mine. The charts in front of me needed a nurse practitioner, and the woman who raised me already knew exactly who I was. If you've ever done the quiet work, the work no one took a photograph of, the work that didn't get a post or a comment or a single small heart on a screen, I'd like to know. Tell me, in the comments, what you did that nobody saw. Tell me who you sat beside. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that now. There are more of us than you'd think, and I have more of these stories to tell.